Hi, I'm George Mount, and in this series of videos, and this lecture in particular, I am going to discuss this idea of a data academy. How would you build it? What does it mean? How do you make sure it's effective? So on and so forth. Let's go into the next slide here to get a sense of what the objectives are for this video. So first we'll think about, what is this data academy that you are talking about? Of course, it's a pretty catchy term. It's cooler than just saying a data training program, but there's also more to it. It's more institutionalized, more holistic than just a simple training program. So yes, it sounds cool, but there's some meaning to it. Then we'll kind of go through these major 4 steps of a data academy. So first off, how to get the buy-in with this, understanding the market forces that are at play for building data academies, and what's at stake if you do not build one. Then we'll get into designing it, so we'll think about what do our learners need, what do they expect, and then delivering that training to them. Then we will get into implementing the academy, so we'll look at some more nuts and bolts, kind of grittier concepts in developing data analytics training programs. And I really want to focus again on things that are specific to data analytics itself. There's a lot of great material out there on instructional design and building training programs and things like that. But, what's different for data analytics? What do we need to think about that's maybe a little bit unique? And then we will get into evaluating. So how do we measure the kind of ROI that we are going to get from such a program or such a data academy? So to give a little bit of background about me, I'm not a professional instructional designer or technical writer. Kind of stumbled on all this stuff haphazardly, started a blog many years ago, and back then I was a regular Excel grunt, really wasn't very good at it, and I was really shocked at how much it was limiting me of what I could do with my work just because I just was not good at Excel. So I started blogging and learning and eventually started teaching, started getting paid to teach, and from there things have kind of snowballed, and over the last year and a half I've really been focused full time on building these data training programs, working with a lot of the bigger names in the space, so really understanding how to build effective data, specifically training programs. So I'm not exactly a technical writer or instructional designer. I'm more from the subject matter expert space, although I've had more than my fair share of exposure to the instructional technical writing side of things. And I think there is a great need for this intersection. There's not a lot of work out there on teaching good data skills, and as we'll see, it's going to be a big market force coming up here. So as mentioned before, I'm going to really try to focus on what makes teaching data a little different. If you want to leave in the comments, this would be great just to kind of understand where the audience for this is coming from. I put the technical writer here at the king spot. The group that I developed this presentation for primarily had a lot of technical writers, but I really think that everybody around this table has a role to play. So when we build a data academy, it's a very trendy term right now. I think you're really going to hear it. And my goal here is that we can all work together in building this data academy. And vice versa, if you have things that you could teach me, that's great too. I'll have my contact information in the info. Leave a comment. Love to hear about different concepts and theories in instructional design that have been helpful for you. As I mentioned, there's a ton of great stuff out there. So this is the things that I found very unique to data analytics. But if you've got other stuff from working with other technical fields, that's great. So again, really my goal is that when you hear the term data academy, you are going to kind of have a blueprint for what to do and where you fit into this concept. So here are a couple of screenshots that I found recently about this catchy term, data academy. You're going to see that both of these happen to come from the UK and in banking, and that's probably a pretty fair assessment here that these are really going to be more likely in kind of knowledge-intensive industries like banking, insurance, healthcare, things like that. But you're really going to see this term of a data academy. Maybe they won't use those terms per se, but I'm going to pull up an example here from Amazon. Amazon is having a famous upskilling surge right now. By 2025, they want to upskill 100,000 new employees. And just reading this press release, there's so many mentions of data here, right? So there's data scientist, solutions architect, business analyst. A lot of these jobs, even have data in the title or have a lot of data in the descriptions. So this isn't a data academy per se, but these roles are definitely very data intensive. So this idea of upskilling people, particularly to use data and analyze data, is a really important concept to consider. Another cool market trend here comes from McKinsey. They had an article recently on the Analytics Academy, so another kind of market moving event in this idea of building the Data Academy. And you would think, McKinsey is pretty smart, right? Why am I giving this presentation if they've already written the white paper? I'll just stop the video here. Now, I'm kidding. It is definitely good, something to check out. But I think that their perspective is a little different than what I'm going for based on what I've seen from my own experience and just looking at the market, what seems to be the demand for data analytics and data education. There is a problem to overemphasize the AI bit of this. The McKinsey article definitely talks more about that part, getting people ready for artificial intelligence and automation from that end. Obviously, that's important, but sometimes we can start to put the cart before the horse when we do that. We start to think that data is just magic and, we need to get out of the way. So let's take a little step back and understand where organizations really are when it comes to using data. Well, we can talk all we want about AI taking over the world, and I don't want to argue that it's not important, but let's be honest, a lot of organizations just really aren't there yet. Their tech capacities are stretched as it is to be able to print something. So it's really easy to get all excited about artificial intelligence and this data academy on that end. But we need to start where organizations are at. And a lot of the times it's really not at, building AI and automation and things like that. So let's just think, where are organizations in real life right now? What are those pain points and what can we do to solve them? So one thing that's easily overlooked by management, especially when they get sold on this idea of AI, is that working with data is very, very messy. And time equals money, right? So if things are taking a long time, and they are, let's see this New York Times article, so they're cleaning data with 50% to 80% of their time, that's a lot of time. And it's pretty mundane work. So just thinking about this from a cost-benefit perspective, is there any way to lessen this? In some cases, maybe yes more than no, but I think this is definitely a pain point that we should think about when we are building this data academy. Here's another take. This is a skill or packed skill up survey. What is the least favorite time of your data analysis process? And here we see cleaning data comes in at just about 50%. So if we are thinking about this, let's say data analysts are spending the majority of their time doing something that the majority of them really loathe. So maybe there is some kind of a training perspective here on, is there any way that we can make this better? There might even be an employee morale perspective. So let's look at a little bit of data on that as well. So this comes from a LinkedIn jobs report. So we're going to see the sectors with the highest turnover rates on the left here. Technology is the first one, 13%. Not really surprising. Let's drill down on that a little bit over here to the right. Here are the occupations with the highest turnover rates. And the second one there is data analyst. So we're saying that we've got one of the most highly turnover jobs in a very high turnover industry. Maybe there's a link there with people just spending time on low value or low enjoyment, really, activities. So I think there is a training and an engagement and a retention story to tell with just spending a lot of time cleaning data. Maybe there's a way to improve that. One last piece of context before we move on here. So a lot of these articles we've looked at so far have mentioned data scientists. I'm really more focused on the data analyst world. To give you a sense, if you're not familiar with this difference, this is a cool graphic here. So data analytics, for an example here, they're going to be more focused on some of the earlier stages in the analysis process. So they might not be building the recommendation algorithm, but they might do something like work with a marketing team to run a small test that finds out that comedies sell the best on a holiday weekend. and then they would maybe help, build some pricing or marketing strategy for that. This idea of the AI Analytics Academy is definitely going to fall more in line with data science. It's an important element, but something that I'm just not as familiar with. And again, I think that this data analytics part, we need to consider that as well when we think about upskilling for data roles, rather than just going straight to, a data science AI dream team. A lot of places aren't there yet, so we'll look at some of the implications of that effect later on here. Well, if there are any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll put my contact information as well. Again, this is a virtual session here. I'm just talking to myself, so I'll go. I don't have questions for myself. Okay, so next section here, selling the data academy. So let's say that we've been watching the market, right? We're seeing our competitors are doing this. They're building the data academy. Now we need to think about, how's this going to work inside of our organization? Knowing a lot of employers are not going to get too excited with an idea of an academy, right? I mean, that sounds like a lot of work. So they might come up with some kind of a hack or a compromise to upskill your data analyst. Something creative. Let's use hack in the most creative sense here. So what might these objections be? Well, if you've got any thoughts yourself, please let me know what you have found in your experience, or what you suppose would be common objections to doing something like this to build a data academy. I'm going to keep going here. One of these that I found is very common, you may have heard this before, it's not really unique to data analytics, but here's this idea that, why do we need to build some program? Our employees can just go to YouTube, or, we'll get a subscription to a video library, and they can just learn what they need that way. I'm all for self-improvement through self-education. I've taught courses through this video-based instruction. I've put out educational videos on YouTube. But the problem is that this is very much a band-aid fix. We're asking our employees to forage around for tips and tricks, and that's just not a very effective way. If you leave workers to their own devices for training, pun intended, this might actually contribute to the turnover. It's really not going to get at the heart of upskilling a data capacity. So here's another thing that you might hear, why do we need to do this? We have some geniuses in Excel right in-house, so we can just do like a brown bag or an open mic or something like that. We don't need any formal training program. The issue here is that, Gary might truly be awesome at Excel, but that's a necessary but not sufficient condition for spearheading a data academy. We're going to get into the role of SMEs, subject matter experts, in the next section. So let's build a little more on this idea of having these lurking geniuses inside the organization and entrusting them to make everything right with data, and why this might not be a great strategy. So here's another one. Maybe we don't think we need to upskill our current workers. We can just hire some data scientists, right? We'll start a real highfalutin data science team. The problem with this is it's really not cost effective. It's definitely much cheaper to just train people that you have, rather than going out and hiring, data science salaries are very, very high. And there's also a high failure rate when you are just putting a bunch of geniuses in the room and telling them to figure it out. Again, you're really putting the cart before the horse in terms of where your organization is at currently. A lot of organizations are not at the point where they can cultivate a thriving data science team. You need some unified understanding of data before you can get there. So this is just going to result in high turnover, frustration. Your data scientists are going to think that they're not really doing everything that they were trained to do. This is not going to lead to good things. So let's look at some data that supports this idea. Here's a survey on where organizations are self-rating themselves in terms of data literacy, data competency, and things like that. I really like this idea of the data breadline. If you can picture that you've got suppliers of your data intelligence and consumers of your data intelligence, the problem is that we need our data to really become baked in, pun intended, to the organization. So what I'm not saying is that everybody inside of your organization needs to be the next AI engineer, some hotshot data scientist. It's really the opposite point of what I want to make. I really want to emphasize that if we're still using data hand to mouth and it's seen as this kind of scarce good, some people are producers, others are consumers, you have to wait your turn in line to get the data, and you need to be credentialed to actually put that data together yourself. And by the time you get the data, it's probably going to be old, day old, pun intended, and more backward looking. So we see these symptoms in these survey results. If just over half of respondents are claiming that they're not competing on analytics, there's a problem with how we're using data. You've probably seen this inside of your own organization. If you have, please let me know in the comments and things that you've seen how data is just not being well used and is kind of seen as this scarce good, this breadline sort of mentality. So I would say that this all goes back to messy data. I really like this quote. Hadley Wickham is kind of like the Leo Tolstoy of the R statistical programming language world, but probably not as controversial. But anyway, it all goes back to data being messy, and uniquely so. Every organization's data need is going to be a little different. So this just can't be a one-off do-it-yourself kind of initiative where you just tell your employees to look it up on YouTube. I've been myself in organizations who have hired the big deal consultants, gotten the reports. Maybe they've even started new departments to become more capable with data. And this all really often overlooks the root cause. So if we're just adding departments and getting consultant reports, that might add more bread or more bakers to the breadline. But this is really more of a process problem. So it's not totally going to be solved with just throwing more resources at it. We really need to think differently and get to that root cause and take a grassroots kind of approach to solving this data problem. And I see the role of the Data Academy to really take that grassroots approach. That, we have smaller teams that are really struggling with how they use data, and we want to empower them to take control and get out of this hand-to-mouth data breadline kind of existence. So we want to build this Data Academy from the grassroots up and empower people to fight this bad data. If you've got questions, please drop them in. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so let's get into designing the Data Academy. Let's say finally we've got some clearance from the executives, and now we are kind of getting this idea and the objectives together. What's this going to look like at a high level? First of all, you're going to need some subject matter experts to do this. You're probably not a data scientist or data analyst yourself. So what do you want to look for when you are finding these subject matter experts to help you build this Data Academy? A lot of these things aren't really unique to data analytics, but I think they're really important because I see them get overlooked very, very often. And the first one here I'm going to talk about is that content development should trump certifications when you're looking for a subject matter expert. A while back, I had a client where I was meant to be kind of the second stringer. We had found someone with really highfalutin credentials. They'd worked at some of the big consultancies, had very impressive resume, but had never developed any content or any instructional content before. And that was a big limitation. Ended up doing a very bad job, frankly. And I've seen this over and over where we kind of overemphasize the credentials and certifications and, just go for this idea that if we find the smartest person technically, they're going to be able to develop the best instructional design. I think we all know that, the best teachers, that's kind of a different skill set than just being the best at something. Same idea here. You want some versatility in your subject matter expert, and you want to find someone who is going to be agile enough to run fast with some new topic. And I've really found that generally teachers are going to be the best learners, right? So going to that previous point, that just because somebody's got some impeccable degree doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to turn around content on a new topic with a short timetable, right? So you want somebody who's going to be able to kind of dabble and be versatile and be able to teach themselves on the fly and turn out great instructional design content with that. Again, so number 3, these points are all kind of related, but you want to find somebody who's got an eye for being a creator and not just a technician. So trying to find somebody who does think about things like, leaving enough white space in a document, or where can I find the best data set to use, or how can we get that aha moment for the students using the best data that we can find. If a subject matter expert has never done this stuff before, it's going to get overlooked, and these base level details are really make or break for the overall success of a data academy. Okay, so now that we have thought about our subject matter experts, let's think about our learner, right? Putting them first in mind and understanding, what are their goals and aspirations, being user-centric. So who will our academites be? And in particular, I want to focus on where the expectations differ the most from the reality for the work of our employees. In a lot of organizations, you're going to have people who maybe they know that there's something wrong with their workflow. They can kind of articulate what the problem is, but they just don't really know where to go from there. We want the Data Academy to be their chance to get that education and get the buy-in to improve this productivity and improve their overall workflow and their output. So we're doing a data analytics academy here. You would think that our assessments would be very hard and rigorous, and some of them are, and some of them are going to be more qualitative. So let's look at the quantitative ways to assess where are our students at currently. First way, self-rating, pretty self-explanatory. It's subjective, right? Rate your skill in Excel on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay, that's a start, but everybody's self-rating is going to be different. We could use something like a time estimate too. Again, time is money. So if we're in the face of automation, maybe we want to get a sense of, where are our employees' time actually going? How much time are they spending? Are they really using 50 to 80%? Is there any way that we can improve that? We could also do a learning assessment. So this seems like it would be pretty objective, right? We've got some multiple choice question about a specific topic, and we can get a pretty cut and dry take on where people are at. The problem is that, from your own work that problems don't really come to data analysts in the form of multiple choice questions. Things are usually a little messier. So maybe we do need some more qualitative kind of understanding of where people are coming from. And this is going to really help us get inside the minds and the shoes of where people are at when they're working with their data now. So let's look at what some of those things might be. So experiences first. If we can really take the time to understand where are the pain points that our analysts are seeing, what would they consider doing with their data if they knew how to? What's holding them back? What could we change with some kind of a training? We should really also look at emotions. I think that, data analytics seems like this cold profession, but it can be scary when you're working with a lot of data. There's a lot of imposter syndrome. This is a very technical field. You feel like, am I really qualified to do this? And when you're working with this much data, you're going to be afraid to make mistakes. There's a lot of loss of sense of control over your work when you just have these reports and they're so messy and there's no way to just do this without making mistakes. So let's think about, what are our employees experiencing? What are our analysts really feeling when it comes to working with data? We should also think about these goals. So what are the motivations from our learners? What do our learners hope to achieve with some kind of a data academy? Here's some specific examples of some learning assessment questions. The first one seems pretty basic, but again, if we want to focus first on the students' motivations being user-centric, this is a great one to just understand where our users are coming from. The second one, this is a little broader, so let's just get an idea here of what the workflow is now. How do our students see what they use with their data? So how many hours are they spending? What systems do they use? To what extent do they interface? So just start to understand, how they think about and what they do with their data. And then the last one, pretty self-explanatory, 1 to 5. But again, that's like asking, rate your skills with basketball on a scale of 1 to 5. It's going to be pretty different for everybody. So let's take a look at what a more specific assessment question might be. I think this is a pretty cool question here. Let's say that we can ask, which of these best describe how you could perform a left outer jointed power query? So a very specific area of mastery and just some scenarios of, how comfortable would you be with this kind of scenario? So this is a good blend of being specific, but also having some room for kind of self-awareness and just thinking bigger picture about some of these questions. Okay, so now that we are getting a sense of who our candidates are, where they're struggling, now we want to think about what are we actually going to teach them. To do that, we want to think holistically about these data products. I really like this Venn diagram of data products. This is kind of a helpful, if you think about this as kind of like legs of the stool or a stack of products, we want to help our candidates understand and use all of them and have the wisdom to think about, which tool is going to be the best for which purpose. So we don't want every problem to look like a nail to our students because they just have one tool, right? A lot of this is going to be case by case for each organization in terms of what topics in particular, R versus Python or Excel versus Google Sheets or whatever. So we're not going to get into that. but we do want to think about, how can we build this kind of a stool or Venn diagram or stack that our learners can use to be more well-rounded kind of analysts. All right, so now let's get a little more into the nuts and bolts here of building the data academy. Thinking about, what kind of media are we going to use? How are we going to reach our learners? How can we keep them engaged? So let's start with that last question here of engaging our learners and thinking about, what is really motivating and engaging people when they learn data. So here's a survey about what motivates staff to learn online, not specific to data analytics, but I think this is a great thing to tie in with learning data analytics. If we want to make this stuff stick, we want to understand the motivations, right? And a lot of it does have to do with productivity, which ties in very well with what we saw earlier about data cleaning, people spending a lot of their time doing things they don't like because it's kind of manual and messy. So people want to automate things, right? And this is a great motivator to help people learn data analytics. If they can start to automate things, free up time, they don't have to stay late all the time. They can do things that are more enjoyable with their work. That's going to boost productivity. So this is a great way to motivate and keep people engaged with learning data analytics as thinking about, helping you automate things. So again, your job isn't going to be automated away by robots. This is another one that I think really gets overlooked for data analytics. We may not think it matters, but I think it does. So I think it's really important to start to see data analysis as a mode of inquiry and a means of creativity. If we can start to get people to look at the art and the creativity involved with what they're doing with something like a spreadsheet, this is really a great thing that we could do to start to plant data literacy inside of an organization. We hear this term data literacy all the time, the idea, of course, coming from English literacy, but I think that data literacy has that same idea where if people are starting to have fun with data, just like when you see somebody starting to just read for fun and enjoy reading, if they're starting to have fun and enjoy using data, that's really when those seeds are starting to grow. And I do think this is somewhat unique to data analytics. A lot of training programs, it's not really going to be a means for creativity and a tool for expression. But really, when we're using this term of data literacy, it's a lot deeper than we often take it for. So we should think about thinking of this as a much more wholesale thing than just, hey, can you analyze this spreadsheet? No, can you have fun? Can you see this as a way of making sense of the world? Okay, so let's dig into a little bit of how we're actually going to deliver this information. Now that we've found how we're going to engage our learners and keep them motivated and things like that, kind of easy to just use blended learning as this catch-all that, okay, it's blended learning. He must know what he's talking about. But let's dig into what that would actually mean for building a data academy. So first of all, we should have some kind of in-person session. I think this is a great way to provide a distraction-free zone for people to really start to understand and begin to articulate questions and communicate their own knowledge with data analytics. There should also be plenty of online study. There's a lot of great ed tech on assessing data analytics skills, particularly things like interactive coding exercises, and we'll get into that a little bit here. Where things really get interesting is where we can start to blend the Data Analytics Academy's curriculum with real-world applications. So this can be a great way for employees to start to look at problems with fresh eyes, see these workflows and how they might improve. And there's kind of a sense of immunity that people get, when they're a student. They feel like they can speak a little more freely about what they do. And definitely this is a cultural thing to get the buy-in. We want managers involved with that and so forth. That's not really specific to data analytics, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. But we do want to have some blending of work-based projects with these raw tools and curriculum that we're teaching. And finally, a hackathon is a really great way, if you've ever heard of that. This is a very short time frame thing where people start to sprint on some project, right, over 12 or 24 hours where there's some problem and we just race to some solution, just building whatever minimum product that we can in that short amount of time. So this is a great way to democratize, make learning fun, and see what you can do in a short period of time. It's pretty breathtaking, the kinds of things that have come out of hackathons. So we can use this tool for building and teaching data programs as well. Part of teaching students is meeting them where they are, right? And unfortunately, I found a lot of the time when teaching and learning data analytics that it often starts with just denigrating Excel, right? It's kind of seen as the pedestrian. It's not a real serious data tool. And I don't even think that's really true. We saw a few slides back that data product Venn diagram, and it's a part of it. But we won't get into the technical stuff. Let's just think about this as instructional designers, right? It's just bad pedagogy to start by belittling your students at what tools they use are lame, right? And again, if we go to this idea of data literacy, this is all the language of data. So whether it's Python or SQL or Excel or whatever, they're different languages. So maybe Excel is kind of the Neanderthal grunts of that world compared to pure Castilian Spanish. But it's still a starting point for speaking data and being data literate. So let's respect extant knowledge and not denigrate anybody for using Excel. More on here about data literacy. There's this saying in fiction that if you buy the hook, you're going to buy the story. And a hook's something that comes at the beginning of a story that presents some interesting perspective that's going to get readers' attention and get them hooked into that story. For data training, the hook is probably going to be the context of the exercise and the scenario. So specifically the type of data or the data set that you're working with. There's a lot of dummied up data sets out there. Data is proprietary usually. So we're not going to get actual sales data from Walmart, and we're going to have to make up some kind of a superstore data set or something like that. So hopefully inside of your organization, you can actually use proprietary data. That's going to take away from some of the problems here. Of course, some people are going to get finicky about sharing and opening up those data sources. Those are going to be places where building the data academy is going to be the hardest. So let's not focus on that right now. Let's think about some other outside sources that would be good. Oftentimes when we are building these data training programs, people think that, it needs to be something very specific to what someone's going to actually do inside of their role. I don't know if that's actually true. Some of these data sets, baseball records, baby names, movie reviews, these are things that we can still hook the reader into. I think we've all clicked on articles that are, the top 10 baby names or the top 20 best grossing movies. So those are rough data journalism. Same idea where we are thinking about and using data literacy as a way to just have fun and explore the world. We can use these just the same as, work records to plant those seeds and help people really understand and have fun to use data and analyze data. So this is a hack that's going to be more relevant to written material, but it's really been a big coup for me, so I did want to pass this along. I've prepared a ton of content on writing about data, and the praise that I hear the most is that people love the GIFs that I include in my writing. So it's pretty easy. You can just use a screen sharing tool like Camtasia to record your screen and produce that as a GIF. It really does make things come to life when you are writing about data. So let's take an example here. Let's say that you want to show how to convert a range into a table in Excel. How are we going to demonstrate this? Well, here on the left, okay, we've got to convert to convert a range into a table. Select any cell and then press Control T. Then we've got a screenshot here, and it's okay, it gives us a little snapshot in time, but there's a lot of ambiguity here. What point are we? When do I press Control T? Was that already pressed or not? What happens after I hit OK? So this is not really a story. Let's make this as a GIF now. So I've got that here on the right, and now I can see the full process, right? I can see it with my own eyes how everything's going to work. When I press Control T, it's got the keyword call out there. So another storytelling tactic is to show and not tell. This definitely does that, really showing that story of doing this thing in Excel. Here's a paradigm that could definitely be used for written or verbal instruction. This is a fun acronym from the computer science pedagogy world on how to teach coding lessons. So we're going to have 5 steps here from PRIMM. First is predict. So we're going to show some bit of code and ask students to predict what is this code going to do. Second step here is to run it. So find that actual output. We'll ask the students to run it. We'll show them that output and check it against what they thought was going to happen with that code. Then we can investigate. So this is a more nuts and bolts approach, understanding. Let's trace through, label the concepts, really parse out how we got from A to B with that code output. Then we'll modify it. So we have some code that's working, that does something. We want to ask students to build on top of that, whether it's, modifying it, extending it a little bit. So they will start to take something and then modify it. Finally, once they're confident with modifying, they can make. So they can create something similar from scratch rather than building off what's already there. So what's really nice about this technique is that it's slowly starting to build the students up from inspecting something that was not theirs to actually adopting it and making their own. So there's this cool flow chart here, kind of charting out that process of taking something that's not mine, then I modify it. Once I start creating something, it becomes mine, and we want to iterate, and this whole process is an iterative process, but again, it's a slow, gradual process from not mine to mine, and this PRIMM really does a good job of walking students through that process. One thing that PRIMM also does nicely is it avoids starting learners from a blank page. So we don't want to just start them off on a blank page. They're going to freeze. We've all had that moment, right, where we've looked in disbelief at some blank page. And you might think that, hey, this is cheating if we're going to give them some help and have them with a not blank page. But, things in the real world are often like that, where you have something that you need to debug, you have to fix it. Often things are not from scratch. We inherit things, we have to fix them. So this is really not a unlikely scenario when you're actually working with data analytics. So here are some ways that we can kind of simulate that idea of taking a jumble of code and then somehow making it our own to meet our own purposes. So let's look at a couple of examples here for exercises that we can do that. So this first one is called a Parsons problem. What we're going to do here is ask students to drag and drop lines of the code program in the correct order. Now, I don't expect you to have any idea of what's going on with that Python code. The idea here is that we are going to drag and drop and complete the code based on the instruction here. If you do know Python, you're going to see we have a couple of distractors or incorrect elements here. Also, you will see that some of these blocks are actually going to be indented in the final answer. So we would want to make sure that students are indenting this code correctly as well. So here's another thing that we can do called a faded example, also known as scaffolding. More or less fill in the blank, right? So we have some roughly filled out code. We just need students to fill in those blanks and come up with the code to do what we have asked for. So again, we're taking something kind of like halfway completed and asking them to tailor that to meet their needs. So we've talked about this before, debugging, fixing something, even thinking about going to the internet and finding some solution and tailoring it for our own needs. This is a really great way to teach and learn data analytics. There's actually some research indicating that debugging code is a more effective approach than just creating it from scratch. So this should really be a constant emphasis in our training to help debug. And I just like this quote here about staying in bed on Monday because I think we've all had those kinds of Mondays before. So debugging is important. One more technique here. I know this has been kind of a whirlwind tour of different concepts in teaching data analytics, but this one called pair programming is more or less what it sounds like, which is programming in pairs. So you're going to have a driver and a passenger. They're going to trade off on roles with coding. The driver will be the one behind the wheel or the keyboard in this case. They will be pushing ahead, driving towards some destination. And as the navigator, you would be in that co-pilot position, making sure that the driver stays on course, helping the driver make adjustments to the route mid-journey. Pair programming is kind of a controversial practice for programming in tech, but for the purposes of learning, it can be a great aid to do occasionally, not all the time. It helps students think out loud about their work, helps them with giving and receiving feedback, which is a big part of any career, right? Not just data analytics. So doing this from time to time is a great aid in learning and teaching data analytics. All right, any questions? Again, you can go ahead and drop them in. Now let's get to the evaluation part here. So measuring that what we've done has been effective. We've got buy-in, everybody seems happy, but what's the ROI of what we've actually done? There are definitely some ways to quantify the ROI of a data academy from the revenue side. Things like offering customers more compelling services, better inventory stock rates, things like that. But I'm definitely going to focus on the expense side, as I find that they can be made a little more concrete and more immediate. So probably the simplest victory you're going to declare is with time savings. I've personally seen and been involved with creating some solutions for things that used to take hours. We've reduced it into something that's fully automated. You kick it off with the click of a button, and that's definitely a win on return on investment. Ideally, this is going to free up your analysts to do more productive things. These other benefits may come a little further down the road, but they're still fairly concrete. If you really start to enable these processes, you're going to begin to disband that data breadline culture. And that means that your data teams are going to be happier with what they're doing. It's going to be a little more advanced. They're going to stick around longer. They're going to have more fun with their work, do more creative things. And eventually, you really want to lower the bar for data analytics. With this data academy, you're going to find that it's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot more effective to just train in-house than just trying to go out and hire those geniuses to take care of these problems for you, because as we've seen, that's not always the most effective approach. Last but not least, I want to prognosticate a little bit here on what I see as the most highly advanced stages of a data academy. So you probably would have expected to see Bloom's taxonomy at some point in this presentation. Let's think to the top here. Creativity, creating something new is the highest stage of understanding. And this is the same approach with a data academy. So when we are creating things with data, it makes learning a social process. And this becomes a really great content marketing tool, frankly, and a way to recruit and retain the best employees. Let's take a look at an example of how that would go. I've got a news story here from Goldman Sachs that they have open sourced their data cleaning program here. I've got a quote here at the bottom. We are using Alloy because it radically reduces the cost of wrangling disparate data sets and disparate sources of data together. Sounds pretty familiar of what we were talking about, right? Data wrangling is a big problem. That's an inside term on cleaning and preparing data. So not every organization is going to be Goldman Sachs, of course, but I do think the most sophisticated data academies are going to have some element of an open source process to them. It's a relatively cheap way of showing to the outside world that you're good with your data, that this is going to entice new analysts to come if they can see that you've got your eye on the ball and you've kind of documented your processes. It's going to be less worrying for people to come inside that organization, because that's every analyst's fears, to get somewhere that's just not ready to use data, and they start to just have to do some of the trivial data breadline sorts of things inside that organization. So this would be the most advanced stage, is if you're starting to use this data academy as a content marketing tool. So before we part ways, I want to share some recommended resources for you, and please, if you want to get in touch, I'll have that at the end as well. This first one here is from O'Reilly, Creating a Data-Driven Organization. This talks about a lot of the managerial aspects of building that data culture. So things we haven't talked about, right? Like privacy, risk, ethics, what kind of data to collect, what objectives should be for data analysis. This is really going to help you set that stage for how data fits into the organization strategy as a whole. So there's some overlap with what we've discussed. This is going to be more from a managerial perspective. We've really focused more on the learning and development side of things. If you're interested in this idea of how to teach people to use data and to code, this is the book. I mentioned that there's not a lot of literature on the topic, but this book really bucks the trend, and it's a great first foray into this topic. Gives you tons of ideas of helping people learn how to especially code and build very effective training programs around that purpose. Another piece here, the Data Academy is really catching on in the nonprofit and government world. Particularly here, this is from GovX, which is kind of a think tank from Johns Hopkins that helps cities use data effectively. So this is a cool little worksheet that they came up with on getting started with building a data academy, coming up with some of these questions and things that you should consider before you start to build it. Last but not least, this is not a book, but I do want to let you know about a resource library that I'm coming up with. I've got some stuff there already. This is going to give you access to things like syllabuses, learning objectives, lesson descriptions, learning exercises. I'm going to plan to put some pedagogical tools in there, like white papers, checklists, possibly things like slide decks, games. Right now, I've got a lot of these learning exercises, the workshops at the beginning. So if you go and email me, actually, right now, I want to get this set up as a website, but please feel free to email me asking for access to that resource library. I will send it out to you, and we'll stay in touch. So thank you for tuning into this. Feel free to contact me, leave your thoughts in the comments, find me on LinkedIn. I blog frequently on this stuff, so please check out my website and subscribe there. So I hope that this gave you a sense of what is meant by this idea of a data academy. I think it's coming, and with this knowledge, you are going to be ready to have that blueprint going inside of your organization. So thank you very much for tuning in. See you next time.